Hey guys, it's National Master Kevin Yang here with another video. This time, it's another one of my earliest games. In fact, I'm just basically going in order, and this was the next game after the Mick Peterson game. If you didn't see the last video, feel free to check out the last video. And this was the second game in the tournament. I'm pretty sure, yeah. Okay, so my opponent, well, I think I wrote this top wrong, but my opponent was white and I was black. Pretty sure, but I didn't notate it correctly in my notebook, so I think I didn't play this first move since I didn't know anything else other than e4. So I'm guessing my opponent played it, and just like a normal human being, just play things I know, and I played pawn to e5. I think I did play this in a game before that I featured on this channel, so it seemed normal. He played e4. Okay, I followed it like usually. If e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, defend the pawn, attack the pawn, control the center, maybe bring the other knight out. Those are my ideas. And look here is I've brought this knight out because if this knight were on f3, it could take this pawn, but since this knight is not developed yet, I can first attack this pawn. So I have a little bit of a tempo in terms of threats, right? Meanwhile, he has these two pawns. He's really fighting for this d5 square. So it's really important to him. Knight c3, bishop c5. Now I've developed this bishop to a square where it controls this d4 central square. So notice that both of us are sort of following the opening principles and we don't want to delay our development that much. h3, castles, knight f3, d6, right? Want to bring this bishop out maybe, bishop e2. This kind of setup is, I don't know, I do not quite like the placement of his bishop because all these pawns are practically blocking his way, so maybe my bishop might be a little more useful than his bishop. So I play bishop e6. He plays this a3 move, and of course his plan is to, let's say for example I play a6. His plan is to move the pawn up to b4. I get back, right, because he's threatening my bishop. And then I go back, and my opponent could play bishop b2 with eventually playing pawn up to this square. So that's his plan to expand. So what I play is a5. As I said before, right, in my previous video, you saw the concept of prophylaxis. Prophylaxis. It's a very strong word meaning basically to prevent what your opponent wants to do, or just being able to protect against what your opponent wants to do and at the same time think about your own ideas. So in this case, by pushing this pawn, I get some space for this rook and I'm able to protect against my opponent's threat of moving with, as we saw in b4, getting this, right? So if a5, if he plays b4 now, I can take this, right? If he takes back, I could play rook takes rook for free, right? So he doesn't want to do that, so he plays d3. He looks for an eye to get this bishop out, so that's his key. I play h6. Now this might seem unnecessary, but I recognize that I like this knight, right? It's controlling this square, it's controlling this d5 square. I don't want to lose a protector. So let's say if I played c6, or I played rook e8, right? I was thinking he could play bishop g5 and get the pressure out, right? Get the pressure of this pin, the knight and the queen, and maybe get the knight in here as a central square. So both options are available. So what I do is another prophylaxis move to prevent against my opponent coming there, right? So he castles. I play knight c6. I want to load up on this square, the d4 square, which is also important in the center. He plays knight d5 finally. He wants to execute, he wants to firmly establish his position on that square. So I deeply respect that. I take it with the bishop. Now notice, if I take it with the knight, he can take with any pawn. And there'll be a fork on the knight, fork on the bishop, so I don't want to take with the knight. So taking with the bishop is what I chose. Maybe I didn't have to take, right? So what I would have done if I was at a higher level, let's say, I would play the move knight d4. And the reason for this knight d4 move is I don't have to take right away. I can use this pawn, move it up, and threaten this knight. So for example, if my opponent plays rook e1, right, just as a random move, I can play this move, c6, hit the knight, and force him to move, right? I don't have to capture, because the capturing won't benefit me that much. So in this case, takes, queen takes. Now, instead of capturing on this square, now that he's traded my knight here, my queen is also developed, so that's really good for me, right? So that's what you always have to remember. You always have to remember that your captures should be beneficial to you. So in this case, the bishop taking was probably not necessary. So he takes. I play knight d4, right? Knight takes, bishop takes, rook a2, and I played c6. I still countered this pawn in the center. It looked very weak, so I wanted to hit it again. Takes, takes, bishop e3, and now I thought, okay, capturing, right? I could play this, and then I could do this and threaten this pawn. But I felt like if I made this queen move first, if he takes, right, I will take, and I'll have this really solid position in the center, which will benefit my queen more than in this position, right? So now this square is restricted for me, and I can't advance as far as I had in my previous position. So played queen b6. He moved back, and I played d5. Now another move to consider was a4. Now this move is really hard to see because it's more advanced, right? What this move does is I'm trying to get this rook out of the game. This rook already has only one square to move to, but with this pawn coming up, right, we can really restrict its movement. Like for example, if we played something like rook e8, now he can play a4, and then we play rook d8, he can play rook a3. Say we make a waiting move, he can get this rook out this way, and it'll be really more active, which is something I don't want, right? So maybe a4 was better, but I played d5, which is also really good, countering in the center, making sure the fight is won in the center. So that's also one thing I was concerned about. Takes, takes, bishop g4, e4, once again a push in the center. b3, he tries to get this rook out, and to prevent that I should have played a4, right? maybe I should have still played a4 here to restrict this, because if he moves the pawns up, I can play this move en passant, and it really beats the crap out of him. So I played e4, and I allowed him to get some activity. Takes, 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 takes. Rook a8, gotta protect my pass pawn. Then he wants to trade with me, and I don't think I should have traded here, because I really like my bishop. I probably should have went bishop c5 and maybe prevent some b4 push, but instead I did take on b2, takes, rook e8, queen f6. Now, at this point, I was already going for tricks, right? Notice the queen is attacking the rook, and so I was hoping he wouldn't see it, but of course he did. Played queen d6, going for this pawn. Once again, going for tricks. a4, queen b4, going for tricks again with this pawn right here. Queen f3, rook e4, doubling on that pawn. Rook c7, ooh, he's going for tricks now. Queen and rook both attack this important pawn. I play f6, he plays queen f5, and notice he might want to scare me because rook takes, queen check, king h7, and he can play this move because I cannot take because this rook pins the king and pawn. So maybe this would have been dangerous for me. So instead I went for queen d6 to protect this square. He played rook doubling, maybe to threaten the rook up a square to trade the rooks. So I played king f8 for reinforcement. Already this position looks really dangerous, but he played g3, which is interesting. Played rook e8, I got very defensive. And then I realized at this point, maybe I could have some time to go down. Maybe he wants to come in, but there might be nothing, so I'm just going to push. So the bluff paid off. He took, thinking it was a free pawn, but always this is much powerful. Queen h7, thinking maybe I can come in and infiltrate, maybe the rook can check here, but I continue. He checks, king f7, rook check, right? Maybe wanting to take the pawn, but he probably didn't see rook d7. And so when we traded, and now he cannot stop either taking the rook or sacrificing his queen. So he sacrificed his queen and he resigned. So I would say it was a very rocky game for both sides. The only reason I won was, at this point it was still equal, but probably the activity of my pieces were just better, right? And this bishop seems so inactive. But I also made a mistake of allowing this rook to come out. I should have played a4, which was something that I explained is like prophylaxis, right? It prevents the opponent from doing things. But he got in the game, and it became more or less equal, and I made some trades where I shouldn't have. And I was going for tricks here, and I think the only reason I won was because of this pawn. All because of the d2 pawn. So thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and tell me what series you'd like me to cover.